In the heart of Boston, Massachusetts, where the bustling city meets quiet suburban streets, there lies Roxbury High School, a seemingly ordinary institution. Its hallways echo with the laughter of teenagers, the squeak of sneakers on polished floors, and the hum of everyday life. Teachers shuffle between classrooms, students share secrets by their lockers, and the rhythm of academia moves forward without pause. To the outside world, Roxbury High was nothing more than a snapshot of American education. Routine, unremarkable, safe. But beneath its surface, there were secrets. Secrets so profound that they would fracture the very foundation of this close-knit community. At the center of it all was Stella Johnson, an 18-year-old senior whose life seemed as ordinary as the school itself. Stella was known for her warm smile, her impeccable grades, and her natural ability to connect with those around her. To her peers and teachers, she was just another teenager navigating the complexities of high school. Yet, as time would reveal, Stella's life was anything but ordinary. Behind her composed demeanor and bright future lay truths that would send shockwaves through her school, her community, and beyond. Her story, once uncovered, would spark outrage, heartbreak, and a desperate search for answers. It was a story that began in whispers, a rumor here, a subtle change in behavior there, but grew into a scandal that no one could ignore. This is the story of Roxbury High School, a place where trust was broken, boundaries were crossed, and lives were forever altered. And it is the story of Stella Johnson, a young woman whose life took a turn that no one could have foreseen. What happened in those hallways would ripple far beyond Boston, igniting debates about morality, justice, and the consequences of silence. The events that followed would force everyone involved to confront truths they'd rather keep hidden. Welcome to the story of Roxbury High, a tale of betrayal, reckoning, and the human cost of secrets. As we unravel what truly happened, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about trust, power, and the unseen forces that shape our lives. It started with a single conversation, one that Stella Johnson never saw coming. On a quiet evening, the kind where the air outside is still and the world feels paused, Stella found her mother, Evelyn, sitting on the edge of her bed. Evelyn's hands trembled as they held a faded photograph, the corners worn with age. Her face carried a heaviness that Stella had never seen before. It was the kind of weight that only years of silence could create. "There's something I need to tell you," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. Stella, sensing the gravity of the moment, sat down beside her. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as Evelyn began to speak. What followed was a story that shattered the life Stella thought she knew. Evelyn recounted a harrowing event from 19 years ago, a traumatic assault that she had never reported, out of fear, shame, and the unrelenting judgment of the world around her. "I thought if I kept quiet I could move on," Evelyn admitted, her eyes welling with tears. "But the past doesn't just disappear." Stella listened in stunned silence as the story unfolded. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Evelyn's voice cracked as she confessed, "When you were born, they told me you were HIV positive." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, dark and suffocating. Stella's mind reeled. For years, she had taken daily medications without question, overheard hushed conversations between her mother and doctors, and noticed the way her mother's eyes would linger on her with an unspoken sadness. Now, all of it made sense, and yet nothing made sense at all. "I kept it a secret to protect you," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "I wanted you to have a normal life, free from the stigma. But you deserve to know the truth." Stella's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms as waves of anger, betrayal, and confusion crashed over her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You had no right to decide that for me." Evelyn's tears fell freely now, but she had no answer that could satisfy Stella. The room grew silent except for the sound of their breathing, uneven and heavy with emotion. Stella's world felt like it was unraveling. The father she never knew, the disease she had unknowingly lived with, and the years of secrecy, it was too much to bear. As the days passed, Stella's emotions churned like a storm at sea. Anger gave way to sorrow, sorrow to confusion, and confusion back to anger. She thought of the opportunities she had missed, the relationships she had avoided, and the life she might have had if only she had known. And beneath it all, a new emotion began to take root. Resentment. Not just toward her mother, but toward a world that had failed her in so many ways. Walking the halls of Roxbury High School, Stella began to see things she hadn't noticed before. The casual dismissiveness of authority figures, the inappropriate glances exchanged between students and teachers, the whispered rumors that everyone seemed to ignore. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a darker reality lurking just beneath the surface. Fueled by her growing resentment and a desperate need for control, Stella made a decision. She would no longer be a victim of her circumstances. Instead, she would confront the injustices she saw around her, and she would do it on her own terms. What began as a slow-burning anger soon transformed into a dangerous resolve, one that would set the stage for the events that would follow. From the moment Stella learned the truth about her own life, her perspective on the world around her shifted dramatically. The hallways of Roxbury High, once a blur of familiar faces and routine interactions, now seemed to hold an unsettling undercurrent. The laughter and chatter that echoed through the school no longer felt innocent. Instead, it was as if shadows clung to the walls, whispering of things left unsaid. Stella began to notice the details she had once overlooked. Teachers lingering a little too long after class, their gazes flickering to places they shouldn't linger. Offhand comments that seemed innocuous at first, but carried a weight that unsettled her in hindsight. A touch on the shoulder that lasted just a moment too long, or the way certain staff members seemed to hover near particular students. What had once felt like casual friendliness now felt calculated, manipulative even. One day, Stella overheard a conversation between two students in the cafeteria. They whispered in hushed tones, darting glances toward the faculty table. "Principal Harris is at it again," one muttered. "I heard he's meeting with that junior after school, alone." The other student's eyes widened in disbelief but said nothing, their silence heavy with unspoken understanding. It wasn't the first time Stella had heard whispers like this. The rumors about Principal Harris had circulated for years, growing louder but never reaching the ears of those who could, or would, act. As Stella pieced together these fragments of conversations and observations, she realized the pattern was undeniable. Certain teachers and staff members were exploiting their positions of power, preying on students who trusted them. It wasn't just inappropriate behavior. It was a systemic failure, a culture of silence that allowed predators to thrive unchecked. Stella's heart ached as she thought of the students who might have been hurt, their voices stifled by fear, shame, or the belief that no one would believe them. But Stella's resolve wasn't just born from anger at the system, it was deeply personal. Every lingering gaze reminded her of the secrets her mother had kept to protect her. Every whispered rumor about a teacher's misconduct felt like a reflection of the pain she carried, the knowledge of her own vulnerability. Stella wasn't just angry, she was determined. Determined to shine a light on the darkness that permeated Roxbury High, no matter the cost. She began documenting everything, every interaction, every rumor, every inappropriate glance or comment. Stella's notebook became her arsenal, filled with meticulous notes and observations. She knew that if she was going to confront the system, she needed evidence. But as she delved deeper, Stella found herself grappling with her own emotions. Was this about justice, or was it about revenge? Was she truly trying to protect others, or was she using this as an outlet for her own pain? The weight of her mission grew heavier with each passing day. Stella began losing sleep, her nights filled with dreams that blurred the lines between her reality and her fears. In those dreams, The walls of Roxbury High seemed to close in on her, the faces of the teachers she had come to distrust looming large and distorted. But each morning, she would wake with a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't let the fear consume her. She couldn't let the system win. Stella's decision was clear. She would expose the behaviors she had witnessed. She would force the community to confront the truth, to acknowledge the failures that had been swept under the rug for far too long. But as she prepared to take her first steps toward action, Stella knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. She was taking on a system designed to protect itself, and the risks were greater than she could imagine. What Stella didn't yet realize was that her decision to act would not only reveal the failings of those in power, but would also force her to confront the darkness within herself. The line between justice and vengeance was razor thin, and Stella was about to walk it. Stella Johnson wasn't sure how long she stared at the ceiling that night, the glow of her bedside lamp casting long, wavering shadows across the room. Her mother's confession echoed in her mind, intertwining with questions she couldn't answer. Pain had carved itself into her reality, but anger soon followed, sharp, unrelenting anger. Stella knew she needed to take control, but her plan didn't form all at once. It grew, piece by piece, fueled by her observations and the truths she began uncovering at Roxbury High. She noticed things she hadn't before. Mr. Jameson, her English teacher, lingered too long when offering help after class. Coach Williams seemed overly familiar during basketball practice, his encouragement often coupled with unnecessary proximity. The way Principal Harris's gaze swept over the students during assemblies made her stomach churn. Stella's anger wasn't just personal anymore. It expanded into a need for accountability, for justice. Her plan was methodical. She didn't leap into action, but instead planted seeds, small, deliberate provocations that could grow into the outcomes she anticipated. Stella's manipulations were subtle at first, designed to test the waters rather than plunge into the deep. Her interactions were carefully measured, her demeanor a calculated blend of vulnerability and confidence. One afternoon, Stella lingered in the empty classroom long after Mr. Jameson had dismissed the other students. Her essay, intentionally riddled with errors, lay on his desk. She watched as he leaned over it, his glasses perched low on his nose. "I can't seem to get this part right," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. Mr. Jameson glanced up, his eyes lighting with the opportunity to guide. "Why don't we go over it together?" he offered. Stella nodded, her expression carefully molded into gratitude. As they reviewed the paper, she leaned closer, letting the scent of her floral perfume waft into the space between them. Her hand brushed his. A fleeting touch, one that lingered just long enough to plant doubt in his resolve. She left his office with a practiced smile, her chest tight with conflicted emotions. The encounter had gone as planned, but the satisfaction she sought was muddied by something deeper. The morality of her actions clawed at the edges of her mind. Was she crossing the same lines she despised? Stella shook the thought away. Justice, she told herself. This was about justice. Coach Williams proved to be a more challenging target. His professional boundaries were firmly in place, and his demeanor was grounded. Stella joined the basketball team to gain proximity, enduring practices despite her lack of interest in the sport. She played the role of a dedicated student-athlete, seeking his advice on form and strategy. Over weeks, her persistence chipped away at his defenses. One evening after practice, Stella waited as the other players left the gym. "Coach," she called, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "I'm struggling with my performance. Could we talk?" He nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Stella's eyes met his, the vulnerability in her gaze calculated. "I feel like I'm letting the team down. I don't want to fail." Coach Williams' expression softened. "You're doing fine, Stella. Improvement takes time." "But I need to be better," she pressed, her tone insistent. "Maybe you could help me with some private coaching?" His hesitation was visible, the conflict in his expression stark. Stella pushed further, her words layered with meaning. "I just want to understand how to move better." The tension thickened as her words hung in the air. His response, measured, reluctant, revealed the cracks in his resolve. It was enough. Stella left the gym that night with the faintest trace of a smile, her plan advancing step by step. Yet, as the days passed, doubt began to gnaw at her. Each interaction left a mark on her psyche, the weight of her actions growing heavier with every calculated move. She questioned the line between justice and revenge, wondering if she had blurred it beyond recognition. The faces of her targets haunted her dreams, their expressions a mirror of her own turmoil. But Stella's determination remained unshaken. The stakes were too high, the damage already done too severe to turn back. The fallout from Stella Johnson's actions was immediate and far-reaching. At first, the 5 educators she had targeted went about their daily routines, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But it wasn't long before guilt and fear began to seep into their lives, eroding the carefully constructed facades they had maintained. Mr. Jameson, the once charismatic English teacher, now seemed a shadow of his former self. In class, his normally animated lectures became disjointed, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if searching for unseen judgment. He stopped meeting the gaze of his students, his booming voice reduced to a strained whisper. At home, he withdrew from his wife and children, consumed by the weight of his secret. Coach Williams, the confident and well-liked basketball coach, threw himself into grueling workouts, as if punishing himself could somehow absolve him of his guilt. His booming laugh, once a staple of the locker room, was replaced by curt instructions and tense silences. Rumors began to swirl among the students, who noticed his uncharacteristic mood swings and bouts of unprovoked anger. Miss Rivera, the art teacher, abandoned her usual vibrant teaching style. Her classroom, once a haven of creativity and self-expression, became sterile and lifeless. She avoided one-on-one interactions with students, her guilt manifesting in an almost obsessive need to distance herself. The joy she once found in her work seemed to have evaporated. Mr. Okafor's transformation was less dramatic but equally telling. The passionate history teacher, known for his engaging discussions and thought-provoking debates, now delivered lectures with mechanical precision. His interactions with students became curt and impersonal, and the spark that once defined his teaching seemed extinguished. Principal Harris, however, bore the brunt of the fallout. As the leader of the school, he had the most to lose, and the whispers about his behavior quickly turned into pointed questions. His once commanding presence in the hallways was replaced by hurried steps and averted gazes. The stress etched lines into his face, and he began to avoid the very students he was supposed to lead. For a time, Stella reveled in the sight of her targets unraveling. She told herself it was justice, that they deserved to feel the fear and vulnerability she had carried for so long. But her satisfaction was short-lived. One afternoon, as she walked past the teacher's lounge, she overheard a hushed conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "The results came back," one voice said, barely above a whisper. "We need to go to the clinic." What if we've been exposed?" another voice asked, trembling. Stella's breath caught in her throat as she realized the full implications of her actions. It wasn't just their reputations she had jeopardized. It was their health, their lives, and potentially the lives of their families. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she stumbled to the nearest bathroom. The walls seemed to close in as the enormity of what she had done crashed down on her. In the days that followed, Stella's guilt consumed her. The faces of her targets haunted her dreams, their expressions twisted with anger and betrayal. She saw them everywhere, in the hallways, in the reflections of classroom windows, in the accusatory stares of her peers. The satisfaction she had once felt was replaced by a crushing sense of shame. One night, unable to sleep, Stella sat in her bedroom staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her tear-streaked face was a stark reminder of the person she had become. She thought of her mother, of the strength Evelyn had shown in protecting her, and felt a pang of regret so sharp it nearly took her breath away. The next morning, Stella made a decision. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could take responsibility for her actions. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed the number for the principal's office. When the secretary answered, Stella's voice was barely audible, but her words were resolute. "This is Stella Johnson," she said. "I need to speak with Principal Harris. It's urgent, and I think we'll need to call the police." What followed was a confession that would forever alter the course of Stella's life and the lives of everyone involved. The events at Roxbury High School were far from over, but for Stella, the weight of her secret was finally lifted. Little did she know, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges she could never have anticipated. Stella Johnson's confession was the spark that ignited a firestorm of investigations, media scrutiny, and public outrage. It began in Principal Harris's office, where she sat surrounded by the 5 educators she had targeted. Their faces ranged from shock to fury as Stella recounted every detail of her actions, from her initial plan to the calculated steps she had taken to manipulate them. Her voice wavered, but she spoke with determination, knowing that this was her moment to take responsibility. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know the truth." Principal Harris, his face pale and drawn, leaned back in his chair, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Do you understand what you've done, Stella? The lives you've jeopardized? This is beyond anything I could have imagined." Within hours, the police were called, and the investigation began. Detectives interviewed each educator, piecing together the tangled web of Stella's actions and the educator's complicity. The revelations were damning. While Stella's actions were deliberate, the educator's willingness to cross ethical and legal boundaries could not be ignored. The case quickly gained media attention, with headlines splashed across newspapers and news channels. "Scandal at Roxbury High," "Student confesses to manipulating teachers," and "HIV revelation sparks controversy in Boston community." Public opinion was divided. Some saw Stella as a victim of a system that had failed her, while others condemned her actions as calculated and unforgivable. The legal outcomes were complex. Stella, being a minor, was charged with several offenses, including endangerment and statutory violations. However, her defense team, led by a determined Evelyn Johnson, argued for leniency, citing Stella's mental state, her traumatic upbringing, and the systemic failures that had contributed to her actions. The educators, too, faced legal and professional consequences. Mr. Jameson and Coach Williams were stripped of their teaching licenses and faced criminal charges. Miss Rivera, though spared criminal prosecution, was suspended indefinitely and required to undergo counseling. Mr. Okafor received a formal reprimand, but was allowed to continue teaching under strict supervision. Principal Harris resigned in disgrace, his career in ruins. Through it all, Evelyn Johnson emerged as an unexpected voice for change. Devastated by her daughter's actions but determined to support her, Evelyn began speaking out about the stigma surrounding HIV and the need for comprehensive education. She appeared on talk shows and at community events, sharing her family's story in the hopes of preventing similar tragedies. "HIV isn't a punishment," Evelyn said during one televised interview. "It's a condition, and the ignorance and fear surrounding it only lead to more pain. We need to educate, to support, and to create environments where young people like my daughter don't feel so isolated." The Roxbury High scandal left scars that would take years to heal, but it also sparked conversations that might not have happened otherwise. For Stella, the road ahead would be steep and filled with challenges, but for the first time, she was ready to face them. Not as a victim, not as a perpetrator, but as someone determined to find redemption in the aftermath of her mistakes. 5 years later, the echoes of the Roxbury High scandal still lingered, though the community had slowly begun to heal. Stella Johnson, now 23, had emerged from the shadows of her past, determined to make amends and carve out a new purpose for herself. After serving her sentence in a juvenile detention facility, Stella dedicated her life to HIV education and advocacy. She traveled across the country speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. Her honesty and vulnerability resonated with audiences, and she worked tirelessly to dismantle the stigma surrounding HIV, a burden she had carried for far too long. At Roxbury High School, reforms were implemented in the wake of the scandal. New policies were put in place to protect students from exploitation, and the school introduced comprehensive sex education programs. These included lessons on consent, healthy relationships, and HIV awareness. What had once been a source of shame for the community became a catalyst for change, ensuring that future generations would be better equipped to navigate the complexities of adolescence. One evening, after delivering a talk at a local community center, Stella stepped into the crisp Boston air. She clutched a stack of pamphlets, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly night. As she walked down the street lost in thought, she nearly collided with someone coming the other way. She looked up, an apology on her lips, and froze. It was Mr. Okafor. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Then, to Stella's surprise, Mr. Okafor gave her a small nod. "I saw your name on the flyer for tonight's talk," he said, his voice careful but not unkind. "You're doing good work, Stella." Stella swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I'm trying." Mr. Okafor nodded again and continued on his way. Stella watched him go, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. She knew she had no right to expect that. But it was acknowledgement, a recognition of her efforts to make amends. And for now, that was enough. As Stella reached her apartment, she paused to look up at the darkening sky. She thought about the lives that had been changed by her actions, the teachers, their families, and the students at Roxbury High. She thought about her mother, whose unwavering support had been her anchor through the storm. And she thought about the long road she had traveled, one filled with mistakes, pain, and ultimately, redemption. Stella knew she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. Each day was an opportunity to make a difference, to use her experiences as a force for good. And as she closed her apartment door behind her, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Hope for understanding, for forgiveness, and for a world where no one else would feel driven to the desperate acts she had once committed. The story of Stella Johnson and Roxbury High School will forever be remembered as a cautionary tale, a tragedy that forced a community to confront uncomfortable truths. But it is also a story of growth, of change, and of the enduring human capacity for resilience. In the end, it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is room for accountability, understanding, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The story of Stella Johnson and Roxbury High School is a cautionary tale. It reveals the fragile balance of trust within institutions, the devastating consequences of unchecked power, and the ripple effects of pain left unresolved. But it also offers critical lessons. First, education about HIV must be prioritized. For too long, misinformation and stigma have caused needless suffering. By fostering understanding and compassion, we can build a society that supports those living with HIV rather than ostracizing them. Second, the need for stronger safeguards against abuse of power in schools cannot be overstated. Clear policies, accountability, and open communication are essential to protect students and prevent misconduct. Finally, Stella's journey serves as a reminder of the potential for personal growth and societal change in the aftermath of tragedy. Mistakes, no matter how grave, can pave the way for redemption if met with honesty and a willingness to change. As the dust settled on Roxbury High School, the conversations sparked by these events began to echo far beyond its walls. They called for action, for awareness, and for a collective commitment to do better. Let this story remind us all: education, empathy, and accountability are the keys to a brighter future. If this story moved you, consider supporting organizations that provide HIV education and advocacy. Together, we can fight stigma, promote understanding, and ensure that no one feels alone in their journey. Change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with you. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to Darkest True Crime Stories for more gripping narratives that uncover the truths behind the most chilling cases. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Join our community as we continue to explore the stories that challenge us to question, to learn, and to grow. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.